Looked like it's going to be a celebration of Father's Day. It was a warm, sunny day when we got off those rented buses that took us and our residents from the community and stepped on those white beaches in Durban. The beaches, those pristine beaches that we could only look at on our way to our own non-white beaches. We had organized the community and taken the residents as a young activist to take over those beaches as a sign of a demonstration of our objection against apartheid laws and discrimination and segregation. I walked hand in hand with my fiancée, Joy, watched by hundreds of white policemen, security branch policemen, equally anxious and trigger happy. A sudden slap on my face saw me hurtle to the ground. I was shocked. The words of the white policeman rang in my ears. Hey, you coolie, this is not your effing place. This is not your effing beach. F off. I was shocked. The slap sounded. The words sounded more. I was hurt. I was rejected. I felt this deep sense of rejection and pain. What happens when people feel rejected? You either go down a spiral, downward spiral of your own worthlessness, or you go up in an upward spiral. Your resolve strengthens, your spirit rises, and your will to go further deepens, and you go up a upward spiral. And that's what I chose on that day. I dusted myself off from the ground, spat those grains of sand from my bleeding mouth, clenched my fists tighter, raised my hands higher, stood taller, and shouted, "Amandla, power." It wasn't the first time I faced rejection, you know. Living back in Unit 5, Chatsworth, one of the poorest townships that Indian people were shunted to because of the Group Areas Act, I was forced into adulthood very early on in my life. My dad gave up the headship of our house. I used to see him leave home at 3 in the morning, go to his work as a station sweeper. I longed to have those conversations with him about my experiences, my difficulties, my challenges. But no, that could never happen. I found him to be cold, unemotional, and detached. Or that's how I perceived him to be. And I lived with that kind of rejection for the greater part of my life. I am known as Brian. But you know, my real name is not Brian. My real name is a Tamil one given to me by my Hindu parents, Dhanasegran. But I lived in rejection of Dhanasegran all my life. You see, my dad worked for the railways, and he had a white Englishman as his boss. And his boss insisted that my dad's sons be called after his own children. I was the second in my family, and so I took on his second son's name, Brian. I lived with the rejection of my own name, Dhanasegran, for years. It was later on in my life that I realized that even my surname wasn't my surname. My dad, as a young man, came from the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal, came to the city to look for a job. The South African railways and harbors were recruiting station sweepers and cleaners. He didn't have an identity document. And so he borrowed his friend's ID document and went for a job. His friend's name was Chinsamy. My dad got the job, but he dared not tell anybody that his real name was not Chinsamy for fear of losing the job and losing the little income that he could bring home to his wife so that she could look after his children and give them a home. My name was not Brian Chinsamy. I had lived all my life in rejection of my real name, Dhanasegran Sigamani. I had an opportunity of changing it later on in my life, but I didn't. Because I had built Brian Chinsamy to become who Dhanasegran Sigamani really is. And I know my dad is proud. People respond to the pain of changed names by either going back to their traditional names that their parents gave them in the cultural setting. It was like almost going back home and finding my true identity and finding my way back home. Or, like me, they would accept their adopted and borrowed names in the hope that they would find their identity beyond that name. There's no judgment here. It is what works for people and what makes sense in finding your own identity and finding your own way back. Whichever route you take, whether it's going back to your old name that your parents gave you, or whether it's taking on your adopted name, the key outcome is peace with yourself. If you did nothing about your name, you would either oppose it or accept it. If you oppose it, you will be showing up in the world of resentment, a mood of resentment. And with resentment comes the feeling of negativity, pain, anxiety, bitterness, and anger. If you accept it, you live a life of acceptance. And it's not passive acceptance. It is dynamic. It is an acceptance that allows you to see the world and live in the world of possibilities and hope. And that's the world I chose. I came to a deep understanding of acceptance and rejection when I enrolled for a coaching course 10 years ago. And I finally saw how childhood wounding impacted on personality and how the basic human instincts of self-preservation, intimacy, belonging had a great impact on how one viewed rejection and acceptance. And as I got to understand that, the puzzle pieces began to fit together. It seemed like a veil was lifted off me as I realized that through my childhood, my adolescence, and my greater part of my adult life, I was actually stuck in a victim mentality brought on by my own perceived rejection. Over the years, I got to learn about rejection and acceptance, and I found that in helping others, in teaching others, as I'm a coach and a facilitator of leadership programs, and I teach this to my clients. And the more I taught it, the greater was my healing. And I realized how I could break from the shackles of rejection. This feeling of rejection was an important one for me. Living with rejection in a healthy way is an important life skill for anybody to have. You could use it in your personal life, in your professional life, and your romantic life. Facing my rejection on the beach was a hard hit to my dignity that day. It hit me in the core. My perceived rejection of my dad may not have been as stark as the slap to my dignity on the beach, but it was nevertheless a powerful, powerful impact. It had a powerful impact on my life. The self-limiting beliefs I had about my dad prevented me from seeing who he really was and the sacrifices he made for me. I guess my obsession and fixation with my perceived rejection just blinded me to how he himself went through tremendous trauma and pain in his life to find his true self and live with a borrowed name, to get up in the morning at 3 o'clock, walk 10 kilometers to the nearest train station in Chatsworth, take the train to the Durban Central Station, clean those filthy station platforms, faced the humiliation of his white bosses, walked back home 10 kilometers in the evening, late in the evening, and bring home a paltry income to my mom so that she could take care of her children. Not only that, with that paltry income, he saved enough money for me to go to university, to become a teacher, and to set me up in my own journey of success. What I saw as rejection from my dad was actually him giving himself up for me, name and all, so that I could have a better life than he did. When I finally came to that acceptance, I remember running out of my coaching class 10 years ago with tears streaming down my eyes, calling him on his landline and saying, "Dad, I love you. Thank you for everything you've done for me." I couldn't wait for that coaching program to be over that weekend when I took the next flight from Cape Town to Durban to embrace him and to reaffirm my appreciation and gratitude for him. It's 10 years now, and my dad and I have a warmer relationship. I guess I'm one of the lucky ones who still has his dad around and who can make amends and bring about healing between us so that we don't live a life of regret. He still puts his frail, withered old hand out in a traditional handshake when we see each other. I try to embrace him. He's out of hearing now, he's 96. But I know he can hear my heart beat as it pounds. I love you, Dad. Thank you for being my dad. Chinsamy Segamani. Thank you.